The question no one wants to ask. Why does something that feels so intense leave me feeling so empty? It doesn't begin with pain. It begins with electricity, the kind that makes your phone feel heavier in your hand when their name lights up the screen. The kind that speeds your pulse before you've even met in person. The kind of connection people describe as, "I've never felt this before." At first, it feels like chemistry, rare chemistry, the kind people spend years searching for. Sex that feels consuming, almost hypnotic. Eye contact that lingers just a second too long. Words that land perfectly as if they were custom built for you. You tell yourself this is what passion is supposed to feel like. This is what aliveness feels like. And then, quietly, subtly, almost invisibly, something else appears, an unease you can't quite explain. A tightness in your chest after you leave, a sense that you are closer yet somehow less seen. You replay conversations in your head not because they were beautiful, but because something felt off. You wonder why, after something so intense, you feel restless instead of calm. Why, after sex, instead of feeling connected, you feel hollow. Why pleasure is followed by a strange emotional drop you can't name. And that's the question no one wants to ask. Why does something that feels this powerful leave me feeling this empty? Most people don't ask it out loud. They assume the problem must be them. Maybe they're overthinking. Maybe they're afraid of intimacy. Maybe this is what modern dating is like now, fast, intense, undefined. Maybe if they just relax, stop analyzing, and enjoy the moment, the discomfort will disappear. So they stay. They stay for the chemistry, they stay for the sex, they stay for the version of the connection that existed at the beginning. From a psychological perspective, this is one of the most dangerous crossroads a person can stand at. Not because it looks harmful, but because it feels intoxicating. Here's a truth that rarely gets said plainly. Intensity is not intimacy. Passion is not safety. And desire is not evidence of emotional connection. In fact, the human nervous system is especially vulnerable to confusing these experiences. When something feels rare, powerful, and emotionally charged, the brain releases dopamine. When sex is involved, oxytocin floods the system, encouraging bonding and trust. Your body is responding exactly as it was designed to. That response is not a sign of poor judgment. It is biology doing its job. The problem arises when the person you are bonding to is not bonding back in the same way. Many people who find themselves in sexual relationships with narcissistic partners are not naive or emotionally fragile. They are often insightful, empathic, intelligent, and deeply capable of love. What traps them is not weakness. It is hope layered on top of chemistry. Hope that the connection will deepen. Hope that the emotional distance will close. Hope that the person who feels so powerful in bed will eventually feel safe in life. But narcissistic dynamics don't collapse all at once. They erode slowly. What begins as excitement gradually becomes confusion. What begins as passion becomes self-doubt. You start to feel like you're always reaching, adjusting, wondering if you said the wrong thing or wanted too much. And still, you tell yourself, but the connection feels so strong. As a psychologist, I want to be very clear about something. This experience does not mean you are broken. It means your nervous system is responding to a dynamic that stimulates arousal without providing security. That combination is deeply compelling and deeply destabilizing. This is why people stay longer than they intended. This is why walking away feels harder than it should. This is why, even when the relationship is casual, the emotional impact is anything but. The emptiness you feel afterward is not a mystery. It is the absence of emotional attunement. It is what happens when your body is invited in, but your inner world is not truly met. And if you've ever thought, "I've never felt this connected to anyone, yet I've never felt so alone," That paradox is the first sign that something important is trying to get your attention. In this series, we are going to talk honestly about 13 signs that the person you are having sex with may be operating from narcissistic patterns. Not to diagnose, shame, or demonize, but to give language to experiences that many people struggle to explain. More importantly, we will talk about how to leave these dynamics without losing yourself, and how to stop being drawn back into them again. Because awareness is not about fear. It is about choice. And before we go any further, if this conversation already feels uncomfortably familiar, I want to invite you to pause for just a moment and do something simple. Subscribe to the channel. These conversations take time, depth, and emotional honesty to create, and your support makes it possible to continue sharing content that helps people make sense of experiences that are often lived in silence. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Quick question: when you think about the person you're most drawn to right now, which feels more true? A. The connection feels intense and exciting, but also leaves me anxious or unsettled afterward. B. The connection feels steady, grounding, and emotionally safe, even when it's passionate. Comment A or B below. Your answer might reveal more than you expect, and it will shape everything we're about to explore next. Part 2. How Narcissists Experience Sex. Signs 1 to 3. Sex is power, validation, and ego regulation. To understand why sex with a narcissistic partner can feel so intense and later so destabilizing, we have to step outside the romantic narrative most of us were taught. We have to look at sex not as a shared experience, but as a psychological function. For many narcissistic individuals, sex is not primarily about closeness, it is about regulation. At a deeper level, narcissism is organized around a fragile sense of self. Beneath the confidence, charm, or sexual magnetism is an internal world that relies heavily on external reinforcement to feel stable. Sex becomes one of the fastest, most efficient ways to regulate that inner emptiness. This is the first critical difference. When emotionally available people have sex, their nervous systems move toward connection. They feel more relaxed afterward, more grounded, more bonded. When narcissistic partners have sex, the nervous system often moves toward dominance and reassurance. Sex becomes proof, evidence, a way to temporarily silence self-doubt. This is why the energy can feel consuming at first. Narcissistic partners often know how to create desire. They may be attentive, confident, bold, or intuitively tuned into what excites you. But what they are tracking is not your emotional experience. It is their own reflection in your response. If you look closely, the underlying question driving the encounter is not, "How do we connect?" It is, "What does this say about me?" That brings us to the first sign. Sex becomes a form of power rather than intimacy. Power in this context does not always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks seductive, charismatic, or intensely focused. But the psychological function is the same: to feel in control of how they are perceived. Being desired gives them a sense of superiority. Being wanted reassures them that they matter. You may notice that sex feels directed rather than mutual. There is often a subtle sense that the pace, tone, or emotional depth is being steered. This can feel exciting, especially if you are used to taking the lead emotionally. But over time, it creates an imbalance. One person is expressing, the other is managing. The second sign emerges naturally from the first. You are required to admire them. In the beginning, admiration may be invited gently. Compliments are drawn out. Reactions are monitored. Your pleasure becomes important, not because it nourishes you, but because it reflects well on them. You may feel subtly guided toward affirming how exceptional they are as a lover. This dynamic can be confusing because it often looks like generosity. Some narcissistic partners are highly attentive in bed. They ask questions, they remember preferences, they appear invested. But the emotional center of gravity is still pointed inward. Your desire is fuel. Your admiration is confirmation. As long as you remain impressed, the connection flows. The problem is that admiration is not a stable foundation for intimacy. It creates pressure. Over time, you may sense that your authentic reactions matter less than the image you are helping maintain. You might hesitate to express boredom, discomfort, or ambivalence, not because those feelings are untrue, but because you can sense they would not be received safely. Slowly, your role shifts from participant to audience. The third sign is more subtle but equally revealing. They must always be right, even in the most intimate spaces. Healthy sexual relationships require flexibility. They involve curiosity, feedback, and a willingness to adjust. Narcissistic partners struggle here because being wrong threatens their self-image. Even minor preferences can become points of contention. If you express a need or boundary, it may be reframed as a flaw in you. If something doesn't feel good, the conversation may turn into an explanation of why it should. Disagreement becomes destabilizing, not because the topic is important, but because it challenges their sense of authority. Over time, this creates a quiet but profound psychological shift. You may begin to doubt your own experience. You may soften your voice. Choose your words carefully or stop speaking up altogether. Not because you lack clarity, but because you've learned that clarity has consequences. From the outside, nothing looks obviously wrong. From the inside, something essential is shrinking. What makes this dynamic particularly powerful is that it does not feel abusive in the conventional sense. There may be no raised voices, no overt cruelty, no obvious coercion. Instead, there is an ongoing reorientation of reality, where their experience is centered and yours becomes secondary. Sex, in this context, does not deepen emotional safety. It amplifies vulnerability without protection, and this is why the aftermath matters so much. After sex with a narcissistic partner, many people describe feeling restless, emotionally exposed, or oddly alone. The body has opened, but the bond has not formed. The closeness dissolves quickly. Texts slow down. Energy shifts. You are left holding feelings that were never fully shared. That emptiness is not imagined. It is the nervous system registering that something intimate happened, without true mutuality. Understanding this does not mean judging the other person or yourself. It means recognizing that sex can serve very different psychological purposes depending on who is involved. When sex is used to regulate ego rather than build connection, intensity replaces intimacy, and validation replaces vulnerability. And if you find yourself feeling powerful attraction alongside growing emotional confusion, that contrast is not accidental. It is the shape of the dynamic itself. In the next part, we will explore how this imbalance begins to distort perception, and how gaslighting quietly enters the most intimate spaces, long before you realize what is happening. Part 3. Gaslighting in the Bedroom, Signs 4-6. When your reality slowly disappears, gaslighting in intimate relationships rarely arrives loudly. It does not announce itself as manipulation. It enters quietly through tone rather than words, through implication rather than accusation. And when it unfolds in sexual and romantic spaces, it is especially powerful, because it takes place where vulnerability is already high. This is the stage where many people begin to feel as though they are losing their footing, but cannot explain why. One of the earliest signs is being told who you are by someone who has not earned the right to that knowledge. A boundary you express becomes evidence of a flaw. A preference is reframed as a pathology. Your pace is interpreted as fear. Your hesitation is labeled emotional unavailability. These conclusions are often delivered with calm certainty, sometimes even with concern, which makes them difficult to challenge without feeling defensive. What is happening psychologically is not insight. It is authority being claimed over your inner world. When someone consistently tells you what you think, what you feel, or why you behave the way you do, they position themselves as the expert on your experience. Over time, this erodes self-trust. You may begin questioning your own motivations, wondering if they see something you don't. The danger is not that they are wrong in every instance. It is that their interpretations begin to replace your own. This leads directly into the next sign, the inability to communicate safely about sex. In healthy dynamics, conversations about sex, preferences, discomforts, curiosities are imperfect but possible. They require openness and humility. In narcissistic dynamics, these conversations often collapse before they begin. Any feedback that implies adjustment can be experienced as criticism. Any expression of dissatisfaction may be met with defensiveness, dismissal, or subtle reversal of blame. You may notice that discussions turn circular. You explain how something made you feel, and the focus shifts to why your feeling is unreasonable. You describe a need, and suddenly you are being analyzed. The topic moves away from resolution and toward proving who is right. Eventually, many people stop trying. This silence is not consent. It is self-protection. Psychologically, this matters because the bedroom is not just a physical space, it is an emotional one. When communication becomes unsafe there, the nervous system learns to stay alert even during moments of closeness. You may find yourself enjoying parts of the experience while simultaneously bracing for emotional fallout. Pleasure becomes mixed with vigilance. The third sign in this cluster is often the most painful to acknowledge. Your needs and emotions gradually stop mattering. This shift is rarely abrupt. At first, the connection may feel attentive and engaging. But as time passes, responsiveness decreases. Your reactions are met with impatience or indifference. Emotional attunement fades. When you are hurt or confused, the response may range from minimization to irritation, as though your inner world is an inconvenience. From a psychological standpoint, this reflects a core difficulty with sustained empathy. Narcissistic individuals can often mirror care early on, particularly when they are motivated by attraction or novelty. What becomes evident over time is not cruelty but absence. The capacity to remain emotionally present when it does not benefit them is limited. This is where gaslighting becomes especially destabilizing. When your emotions are consistently dismissed, you begin to doubt their legitimacy. You may tell yourself you are too sensitive. You may rationalize their distance. You may feel embarrassed for wanting reassurance, even though reassurance is a basic relational need. Slowly, your emotional compass recalibrates around their reactions rather than your own experience. Many people describe this phase as feeling smaller, though they struggle to articulate what that means. It is the quiet shrinking that occurs when your feelings are repeatedly deprioritized. You may notice yourself editing your words, managing your tone, or anticipating their responses before you speak. This is not intimacy, it is self-erasure in the name of connection. What makes this particularly confusing is that nothing overtly abusive may be happening. There may be no shouting, no insults, no dramatic conflict. Instead, there is a steady pattern of emotional invalidation that leaves you feeling unseen while questioning whether you have the right to feel that way at all. The body often recognizes this before the mind does. You may feel anxious before conversations, even casual ones. You may feel relief when interactions go smoothly and disproportionate distress when they do not. These reactions are not irrational. They are adaptive responses to an environment where emotional safety is inconsistent. It is important to understand that gaslighting does not require malicious intent to be harmful. Whether deliberate or unconscious, its effect is the same. It distorts your relationship with your own perception. When this happens in a sexual context, the impact is amplified because physical closeness encourages emotional openness that is not being reciprocated. Over time, you may find yourself holding emotions alone after intimacy, processing confusion, disappointment, or longing without support. The connection feels intense, but you feel increasingly isolated within it. That isolation is not a failure to connect deeply enough. It is the absence of mutual emotional presence. Recognizing this stage is not about assigning blame. It is about reclaiming reality. Your feelings are not excessive. Your needs are not unreasonable. And your discomfort is not a misunderstanding to be corrected. It is information to be listened to. In the next phase, we will explore what happens when this imbalance can no longer be sustained, and how admiration quietly gives way to devaluation. Part 4. The Devaluation Cycle. Signs 7 to 9. From desire to disappearance, the devaluation phase rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with a shift so subtle that many people miss it entirely. The warmth that once felt effortless becomes inconsistent. The enthusiasm fades, not all at once but in fragments. Responses are slower. Affection feels distracted. The attention that once seemed focused on you now appears conditional, arriving unpredictably, leaving without explanation. At first, you assume this is normal. People get busy, energy fluctuates, relationships change pace. You look for reasonable explanations because nothing overt has happened to justify alarm. Yet emotionally, something is unmistakably different. You feel yourself working harder. You start paying closer attention to what you say, how you say it, when you say it. You notice a quiet anxiety creeping in, a sense that you might be one misstep away from losing something, though you're not sure what that something is. This is not coincidence. It is the beginning of devaluation. Psychologically, devaluation serves a specific function for narcissistic partners. Once the initial admiration stabilizes and your availability feels secure, the dynamic must shift. The intensity that once came from pursuit now has to be maintained through imbalance. Criticism, withdrawal, and emotional unpredictability become tools to reassert control and restore a sense of superiority. This is where the seventh sign appears. There is suddenly something wrong with you. The change may come as subtle comments rather than direct attacks. Observations disguised as concern. Jokes that land with a sting. Suggestions framed as helpful but leave you feeling diminished. You may be told you're too sensitive, too intense, too needy, or paradoxically not open enough. What matters is not the content of the criticism, but its timing and effect. It arrives after intimacy has been established, and it creates self-doubt. You begin wondering whether you are the problem. You may even try to fix yourself in ways you never felt compelled to before. Devaluation works best when you internalize it. The eighth sign often follows quickly. Distance, disappearance, or emotional withdrawal. This is the phase many people describe as the most painful. Not because the relationship ends, but because it becomes unclear whether it still exists. Messages go unanswered. Plans become vague. When you reach out, responses feel flat or delayed. When you pull back, there may be a sudden surge of attention, just enough to keep you engaged. From a psychological standpoint, this intermittent reinforcement is profoundly destabilizing. The brain is wired to seek patterns. When connection becomes unpredictable, the nervous system enters a heightened state of alert, scanning constantly for signs of safety or abandonment. You replay interactions, searching for the moment you ruined things. You wonder whether you imagined the closeness. You question whether asking for clarity would push them further away. The uncertainty itself becomes the bond. This is not accidental. Narcissistic partners often withdraw not because they are done, but because withdrawal restores a sense of power. Your confusion confirms their importance. Your pursuit reassures them of their impact. In some cases, the distance escalates into ghosting, sudden silence with no explanation at all. This can feel traumatic, not because of the loss itself, but because of the lack of narrative. The mind is left to fill in the blanks, and it usually fills them with self-blame. The ninth sign underpins the entire cycle, an obsession with control. Control does not always look domineering. Sometimes it looks passive. Sometimes it looks like withholding. What defines it is the need to determine the emotional temperature of the relationship. When narcissistic partners feel admired, they may engage. When admiration wavers or autonomy emerges, they often retreat. If you begin setting boundaries, asking questions, or expressing dissatisfaction, the withdrawal may intensify. This is not punishment in a conscious sense. It is a reflexive response to perceived loss of dominance. Control is how equilibrium is restored. What makes this cycle especially damaging is that it operates without closure. There is no clear ending, no definitive rejection, only a slow erosion of connection that leaves you suspended between hope and grief. Many people describe feeling as though they are chasing the beginning. The early intensity becomes a reference point, a memory that feels more real than the present reality. You may tell yourself that if you can just get back to that version of the relationship, everything will make sense again. But the beginning was not the baseline, it was the hook. From a psychological perspective, devaluation is not about you losing value. It is about the other person regulating their self-image. When closeness threatens their sense of superiority, distance becomes necessary. When your autonomy emerges, your desirability must be undermined. This is why the cycle repeats with such precision. Admiration leads to closeness. Closeness leads to vulnerability. Vulnerability triggers discomfort. Discomfort leads to withdrawal. Withdrawal restores control. And you are left trying to make sense of a pattern that was never designed to be mutual. The most disorienting part is that you may still feel drawn to them during this phase. Attraction does not disappear just because emotional safety has. In fact, the uncertainty can intensify longing, creating a powerful internal conflict. Part of you wants to leave, and part of you feels unable to let go. This conflict is not evidence of love, it is evidence of conditioning. Recognizing devaluation for what it is does not mean the pain disappears overnight. But it does begin to shift the narrative. The confusion you feel is not a sign that you are asking for too much. It is a sign that you are receiving too little. In the next phase, we will explore one of the most misleading aspects of these dynamics, the illusion of kindness, and why even generosity, including sexual generosity, can be part of the same pattern rather than a contradiction to it. Part 5. The Illusion of Kindness. Signs 1013. Why good sex doesn't mean good intentions. Part 5. The Illusion of Kindness. Why good sex doesn't mean good intentions. One of the most confusing aspects of narcissistic sexual dynamics is that cruelty is rarely obvious. In fact, what keeps many people emotionally invested far longer than they should be is the presence of kindness, or something that looks like it. There may be generosity, attentiveness, even tenderness. In some cases, the narcissistic partner is an exceptional lover. They pay attention to your body. They prioritize your pleasure. They seem invested in making the experience memorable. This is precisely why the warning signs are so easy to dismiss. We are conditioned to believe that how someone treats us in bed reflects how they feel about us as a person. But psychologically, this assumption does not always hold. For narcissistic individuals, sexual generosity can serve the same function as any other form of admiration. It reinforces identity. Being perceived as desirable, skilled, unforgettable, especially in intimate contexts, feeds a fragile sense of self. Pleasure becomes a performance, not an offering. Your response is the mirror they are watching. This is why the aftermath matters more than the act itself. After sex, emotionally available partners tend to move closer. There is warmth, presence, and a natural settling of the nervous system. With narcissistic partners, there is often a withdrawal. The emotional distance returns quickly. Communication cools. Intimacy dissolves. You are left holding sensations and feelings that were never meant to be shared. This is not because you misread the moment. It is because the moment served a different purpose for them. Another sign within this illusion is chronic dishonesty. Lies may not always be dramatic. Sometimes they are omissions, half-truths, or shifting narratives that preserve control. The issue is not deception alone. It is the absence of accountability. Without empathy, there is little internal resistance to lying if it protects image or advantage. Apologies, when they come, often deepen the confusion. They may sound sincere, even remorseful, but apologies without repair do not restore trust. There is no follow-through, no behavioral change, no recognition of impact. The words exist to end discomfort, not to heal damage. Over time, you begin to notice a pattern. Conflict resolves temporarily, but the same wounds reopen. You may feel foolish for believing the apology, then guilty for doubting it. This emotional whiplash is not accidental. It is the result of closeness being offered without responsibility. The most painful realization often comes last. Despite moments of vulnerability or intensity, there is no true emotional intimacy. You may share your body, your fears, even your history, but the connection never quite deepens. You are close but not bonded, seen but not held. This absence can feel unbearable because it contradicts everything the beginning promised. You may cling to the generosity, the passion, the sexual attentiveness as evidence that something real must exist beneath the surface. But intimacy is not measured by how intensely someone touches you. It is measured by how consistently they care for your inner world. Good sex can be intoxicating. It can blur perception. It can make emotional absence feel tolerable, temporarily. But over time, the nervous system knows the difference between being desired and being cherished. Recognizing the illusion of kindness is not about denying the good moments. It is about seeing them in context. When generosity exists without empathy and pleasure exists without presence, the relationship cannot sustain emotional safety. And safety, not intensity, is what intimacy requires. Why it feels so hard to leave trauma bonding, addiction, and false hope. Why it feels so hard to leave trauma bonding, addiction, and false hope. By the time you realize the relationship is harming you, leaving no longer feels like a simple choice. On the surface, it may seem obvious. You see the patterns. You feel the exhaustion. You know logically that something is wrong. And yet the idea of walking away feels almost unbearable, as if you would be tearing yourself from something essential. This is the moment many people turn their pain inward and ask the most damaging question of all. What is wrong with me? From a psychological perspective, the answer is very clear. Nothing is wrong with you. What you are experiencing is the predictable result of trauma bonding. Trauma bonding forms when intense emotional or physical closeness is repeatedly paired with withdrawal, neglect, or emotional pain. The nervous system becomes conditioned to associate relief with the same person who causes distress. Each moment of reconnection feels like oxygen after suffocation. Each withdrawal feels like threat. Over time, your body learns that survival depends on regaining closeness even when closeness hurts. Sex intensifies this bond. Oxytocin, the hormone released during sexual intimacy, promotes trust and attachment. Dopamine reinforces reward-seeking behavior, especially when rewards are unpredictable. Together, these neurochemical forces create a powerful loop: longing, pursuit, brief relief, loss, and renewed longing. This is not romance. It is conditioning. False hope keeps the cycle alive. You remember the beginning, the intensity, the desire, the feeling of being chosen. That version of the relationship becomes a reference point, a memory that feels more real than the present. You tell yourself that if you can just get back there, everything will make sense again. You wait for the warmth to return, for the distance to close, for the connection to stabilize. But hope in this context is not optimism. It is a survival strategy. Many people caught in trauma bonds have histories where love was inconsistent. Emotional neglect, unpredictable caregiving, or early relationships where affection had to be earned can prime the nervous system to tolerate instability. What feels unbearable to others feels familiar here. Pain is not confused with love, but it is mistaken for its price. Another reason leaving feels so difficult is shame. You may feel embarrassed that you stayed. You may fear judgment if you admit how attached you became. You may tell yourself that if the relationship wasn't official, you have no right to feel this deeply. These beliefs isolate you further, making the bond harder to break. Narcissistic partners rarely provide closure. There is no clean ending, no mutual acknowledgement of harm, no repair. This lack of resolution keeps the attachment system activated. The mind continues searching for meaning, replaying conversations, looking for answers that were never offered. It is important to understand that the urge to return does not mean the relationship was healthy. It means your nervous system is seeking relief from dysregulation. Wanting contact does not mean contact is good for you. Leaving, therefore, is not an act of willpower alone. It is an act of re-regulation. It requires creating safety elsewhere, through distance, support, routine, and self-compassion, so that your body can slowly learn that connection does not have to hurt to be real. The difficulty of leaving is not evidence that you love too much. It is evidence that the bond was formed under conditions that distorted attachment. And with time, support, and clarity, those bonds can loosen. Not because you stop caring, but because you start caring for yourself. How to leave and never repeat the pattern from awareness to emotional freedom. How to leave and never repeat the pattern from awareness to emotional freedom. Leaving a narcissistic sexual dynamic is not a dramatic exit. It is not a single conversation, a perfectly worded goodbye, or a sudden disappearance that brings instant relief. For most people, leaving is quieter than that and far more internal. It is the slow, deliberate process of choosing reality over fantasy, self-trust over hope, and emotional safety over intensity. The first and most important step is awareness without self-blame. You do not leave by convincing yourself that the relationship was all bad. That kind of thinking only creates internal resistance. Instead, you leave by telling the truth, that whatever moments of passion or connection existed were not sustainable, and that the cost of staying has become too high. Clarity does not come from demonizing the other person. It comes from honoring your own experience. From there, the work becomes emotional rather than intellectual. Many people try to leave by reasoning their way out of attachment, only to find themselves pulled back by longing, memory, or loneliness. This is why tracking emotional reality matters more than tracking words. Promises, explanations, and future talk mean very little if your body consistently feels anxious, diminished, or unsettled after contact. Your nervous system is an honest narrator. Learning to listen to it is a skill, and one that grows stronger with practice. Creating distance is often essential, even when it feels harsh. Distance is not punishment, it is containment. When contact continues, the attachment system remains activated and clarity becomes nearly impossible. This is why partial disengagement often prolongs suffering. The brain cannot recalibrate while the stimulus remains present. At the same time, leaving without support is extraordinarily difficult. Trauma bonds loosen in the presence of safety. That safety may come from therapy, trusted friends, routine, or even structure, sleep, movement, consistency. These are not small things. They help the nervous system relearn stability, which reduces the pull toward chaos disguised as passion. One of the most transformative steps is redefining attraction itself. Many people fear that leaving means giving up desire, intensity, or excitement. In reality, it means learning to recognize a different signal. Healthy attraction feels grounded. It does not hijack your attention or make you question your worth. It grows steadily rather than explosively. It allows you to be yourself rather than perform for approval. To avoid repeating the pattern, early discernment matters more than perfection. Notice how someone responds to boundaries. Observe whether curiosity or defensiveness appears when you express a feeling. Pay attention to whether communication feels mutual or managed. These early cues are not trivial. They are predictive. Most importantly, be patient with yourself. Healing does not mean you will never feel drawn to intensity again. It means you will recognize it without surrendering to it. It means you will pause where you once rushed, question where you once idealized, and choose consistency where you once chased longing. Freedom in this context is not the absence of desire, it is the presence of choice. You are not meant to lose yourself to feel connected. You are not meant to earn closeness through endurance. When intimacy is real, it does not cost you your peace, it expands it. And when you choose that again and again, you are no longer escaping a pattern, you are building a different future. What began as intensity slowly revealed itself as a lesson. The story we followed is not about weakness, poor judgment, or falling for the wrong person. It is the story of a human nervous system responding to desire, validation, and hope, while quietly enduring confusion, self-doubt, and emotional hunger. What felt like chemistry was not coincidence. It was a powerful psychological dynamic that blurred the line between closeness and control. At first, the connection felt extraordinary. The attraction was immediate, the sex consuming, the attention intoxicating. There was a sense of being chosen, desired, seen in a way that felt rare. But over time, the emotional landscape shifted. Intimacy never deepened. Conversations became unsafe. Needs were minimized. Warmth turned conditional. And the person who once felt magnetic slowly became a source of anxiety. The most painful realization was not that the relationship ended, but that it never truly began in the way it was hoped. What was missing was not passion, effort, or loyalty. What was missing was emotional reciprocity. The deeper lesson in this story is not about narcissism alone. It is about learning to distinguish intensity from intimacy. Many people are drawn to relationships that feel powerful because they mistake emotional activation for connection. But healthy intimacy does not hijack your nervous system. It does not require you to shrink, chase, or doubt yourself. It does not leave you feeling empty after closeness. One of the most important takeaways is this: your emotions are not obstacles to love. They are information. Anxiety, confusion, and emotional exhaustion are not signs that you are too sensitive. They are signals that something essential is missing. When you learn to listen to those signals instead of overriding them, your entire relationship pattern can change. Applying this lesson to real life begins with slowing down. It means paying attention not just to how attracted you feel, but to how safe you feel. It means noticing whether communication invites openness or silence, whether closeness brings calm or vigilance, whether desire expands your sense of self or slowly erodes it. Healing does not mean you will never feel drawn to intensity again. It means you will no longer confuse it with love. It means choosing partners who can meet you emotionally, not just excite you physically. It means recognizing that consistency, empathy, and respect are not boring. They are the foundation of lasting intimacy. Before we close, it's important to say this clearly. Disclaimer.
This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional diagnosis, psychological evaluation, or therapy from a licensed mental health professional. Now, here's a quick question for you, which feels closer to your experience right now. A. I've mistaken intensity and chemistry for emotional connection in the past. B. I'm learning to choose emotional safety and consistency over intensity. Comment A or B below, and I'd really love to hear from you. What stood out the most in this story? What felt familiar or challenged the way you see relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your perspective too.